Alright guys, welcome back to another Stogie Lads video. Today I'm talking Cuban cigars. 10 things you need to know before you try them. So, Cuban cigars, especially in the US, are these sort of mythical, legendary sort of status cigars. But here in Europe, they're pretty much the norm when it comes to cigars. Now, Cuba is just one of many cigar producing nations, and they produce some of the best tobacco in the world according to some, and according to some not. So, what are some things you need to keep in mind before buying cigars from this wonderful country? Well, number one, like I said, Cuba is one country producing tobacco, just like any other cigar producing nation. They have one distinct flavor profile, and they will appeal to some and will not appeal to others. Just like Nicaragua and Honduras, it's just a country that produces tobacco. And a pet peeve of mine is sort of the way people talk about non-Cuban versus Cuban. If you just put it into perspective, imagine talking about wine, for example, like non-French and French, or food like Italian or non-Italian. You wouldn't ever talk about those sort of things like that, but for some reason, cigars have become that way. I don't know if it's the embargo in the US that have made it such a divide, or whatever it is, but for some reason we discuss Cuban cigars in a completely different fashion. And you just need to keep that in mind before you buy them, that Cuba has one distinct flavor profile, and they appeal to some, and they just won't appeal to others. And think of it as, buying cigars from any other nation. Some people are like, I don't really like Dominican cigars, and they're fine with saying that. But when it comes to Cuba, it's just such a controversial topic. It's like, if you say you don't like it, people will attack you and say, are you crazy? If you say you love Cuban cigars and don't smoke anything else, people will say you're an elitist. Just have an open mind and keep in mind that, it's one country producing cigars, and they're gonna taste in a particular way that might appeal to some and won't appeal to others. So number two, and this sort of connects to number one, but I wanted to split it off for a different reason. COHIBA, just like Cuba is just a tobacco producing country, COHIBA is just a cigar brand. It might not blow you away, I know, crazy, right? But COHIBA is just a brand of cigars from a country that produces excellent tobacco. So with COHIBA, generally COHIBA is a sort of medium-bodied cigar, and if you love medium-bodied Cuban cigars, you'll love COHIBA. For me, for example, I love the Siglo series. They fall right into the wheelhouse of flavors for me. But COHIBA, for many people, just won't blow you away in any sort of fashion. If you love these hugely, full-bodied, peppery, punch in the face sort of Nicaraguan sticks, COHIBA just, it'll be mediocre, I guess. And a lot of people go in buying COHIBA thinking, no matter what cigar I like, I need to love COHIBA, right? It's the best cigar from the best country in the world, but there just is no objective way of putting it like that. Now, a lot of the reason why COHIBA is actually so expensive is because, like I discussed, Cuba is just one country producing cigars for the entire world. And in that country, there's a small region called Vuelta Abajo, and I've discussed this in a video before. But when you select tobacco from one little part of one little country, you already have a very small selection, and then COHIBA is the absolute best of the best from that little area, right? So a lot of the reason it's so expensive is just because it's the absolute best from that region, and it's just a very small selection of tobacco. It's not the best because it's objectively the best cigar for everyone. So keep in mind, before you buy COHIBA just because you know the name, it's just going to be one brand with a very distinct flavor profile. Make sure it sounds like something you're actually into before getting it. And don't buy a very expensive cigar and then be pissed off that it doesn't taste good in your opinion because you are used to something else. Alright, so continuing on with number three, and this is sort of in conjunction with the other points. Obviously, these are all pretty interconnected, but I've been discussing Vuelta Abajo and the fact that Cuba is one country that produces cigars and they only use one region. Well, this is highly important because, obviously there's a huge demand for Cuban cigars all around the world, and this small area is just can't keep up with demand, and a few things happen, right? So third thing to keep in mind is when you get your Cuban cigars, they'll probably be looking pretty rough compared to what you're used to if you haven't smoked a Cuban before. So I have this, punch, short to punch, and there's a watermark right there. This COHIBA, for example, it's not the nicest looking wrapper in the world. It's pretty nice, it's a pretty sleek wrapper, but I looked at a Camacho yesterday. That's a $6-7 cigar in the United States. A lot nicer of a wrapper. So keep in mind that your Cuban cigars might not look as pleasing to the eye as you're used to. It's just a simple supply and demand sort of case. When you're producing cigars outside of Cuba, you have tons of countries to go for. You can make your wrappers in Ecuador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Mexico. There's so many places to go for, and you have the luxury of being very picky there. You have so much tobacco, so much area to produce, where you can go and select, just the very, very best from that area, because there's so much to choose from. Cuba doesn't have that luxury, so sadly they have to go with what they have. There's a finite amount of tobacco they can produce, and so they just have to select wrappers that might not pass in other countries, and yeah, keep in mind that they'll probably be looking pretty rough. And so number 4 is also sort of connected to that, and it's the fact that I'm sorry, but you are going to have to probably age your cigars before you smoke them. Very interconnected with the fact that there's not enough tobacco. A lot of other companies, such as Davidoff, for example, in the Dominican Republic, they have a vast, if you look at a documentary going through their factory, they have so much tobacco in store. Their storage of, finished rolled cigars, finished dried tobacco leaves, fermented. They have so much tobacco that they can just store because they have such vast fields to go for, that they can age their cigars. And when you buy a Davidoff, it'll be aged for several years. They discuss that. But with Cuba, they just don't have that ability. They can't meet demand barely already as is. So they can't, produce a box of COHIBA Robustos and go, we'll store it for 3 years, because they are already back ordered for many of their distributors. So oftentimes you'll buy, it's October 2020 now. If I go to a local shop and buy a box of Cuban cigars, there'll probably be a June or July 2020 box date on them. And what happens then is that cigars go through a second fermentation when they're just been rolled. So if you don't smoke them completely fresh, like right when they've been rolled, they'll go through a second fermentation in your box, and they'll often taste like ammonia and not be ready to smoke. So you're probably gonna have to wait 6 months to a year, and that's just a sad fact with Cuban cigars. So you'll probably have to age them yourself, and even though I know you want to dive into the box, it's definitely worth it to age them. So it might sound like there's a lot of negative stuff about this, but number 5 is a pretty positive one. It's sort of connected to the aging. It's the fact that Cuban cigars actually have stamps on their boxes. There are box date stamps on Cuban cigar boxes, and I'll show you one right now. This box is Trinidad Reyes. I hope you can see. There's a stamp here where it says Enero, ENE for January in Spanish, and then a box stamp that says 18. So that's January 18 when these were produced. So that'll really help you to know when where in the phase of aging you are, and how young your cigars are. And if you get really lucky, you can get like a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old box already. And this is something that non-Cuban cigars don't usually do, just because they're often already aged. It's not as important, but this is a very old tradition. Ruben, who also runs Stogie Lads with me, he has a box of cigars from 1988 in Cuba, and he knows that because of the stamp, and they did that already back then. There's also 3 letters at the top. This is ARS. That's a code for the factory. They codify each factory, and they switch these codes all the time to keep it secret. I don't even really know why. I guess it's just to be able to know where your stuff is produced and to choose some factories over others. But they do, they put a factory code as well, so you can, I guess, speculate where your cigars were made. All right, number 6. The construction is probably not going to be what you're used to. So in many cases, Cuban cigars are pretty poorly rolled compared to non-Cuban. This is something I've experienced firsthand as someone who smokes probably 60% Cuban but also loves non-Cuban. Non-Cuban cigars are in general better rolled than Cuban cigars. And the draw is going to be a lot tighter than what you're used to. I don't know why this is, but Cuban cigars are just rolled a lot tighter than non-Cuban cigars for some reason. Even though they're not plugged as often as people say, I haven't actually smoked too many cigars that are completely plugged. They're never loose, and I don't think I've ever genuinely had a Cuban cigar that has been very, very loosely rolled. So for some reason, the draw is just very tight. So, be ready that the cigar is going to be tighter drawn than you're used to, and that the construction is probably going to be a bit worse. So don't be too disappointed if your cigar burns a little wonky and the draw is tighter than you're comfortable with. So the construction is different, but the seventh thing you need to know about Cuban cigars is that their storage properties are also a little bit different. There's a sort of consensus that Cuban cigars need to be stored at a little lower humidity than non-Cubans. I don't really know why that is. The tobacco is a little different, I guess, but Cuban cigars perform definitely a lot better if they're around 65% humidity. But if you plan to store your Cuban cigars with your non-Cuban, which isn't really a problem, I do that with a lot of my Cuban cigars that are in the same humidors or Tupperware or whatever. You can dry box it, so I usually just take it out a day before if I know what I want to smoke. Just stick it in a carrying cedar case and they'll dry out a little bit more before you're ready to smoke them, and they'll burn a lot better. But Cuban cigars, yeah, don't store them at around 69% and drag them out of the humidor and smoke them immediately. They'll probably burn pretty poorly and tunnel, and it's a pretty annoying fact, but just for some reason they do burn a lot better at a lower humidity. Number 8. Connecticut lovers, and in some sense Maduro lovers, look away. Cuban cigars, I mean, if you look at these cigars that I have here, just for example, they all have pretty similar color of wrapper. Cuban cigars all pretty much use the same seed, the same sort of tobacco, so Cuban cigar brands will often be sort of small variations of each other, and I think that's a beneficial factor or benefiting factor towards why some people say all Cuban cigars taste alike. I definitely don't agree. There are huge variations between the brands, but those variations in the grand scheme of cigars are pretty slight. So there's small variations between each brand because they use pretty similar tobacco from the same area. But Cuba does not produce any Connecticut cigars whatsoever. There are some light-bodied brands like Oil de Monterrey, H. Upmann to some extent, Cuadrosay, for example, that do produce cigars that I think a lot of Connecticut lovers could enjoy, but no pure Connecticut cigars. And there's only 2 brands that produce Maduro cigars, and they're very recent. COHIBA and Partagas in the last few years have started with Maduro cigars, and a lot of people say Cuban Maduro cigars are kind of a waste. You lose that Cuban twang that makes Cuban cigars special, and you can probably just get better Maduros, or at least cheaper Maduros in other countries and get a similar experience, but more value for your money. So that's the thing to keep in mind if you love those types of cigars. So the penultimate thing, number 9, Habanos don't actually sell cigars themselves directly. So this is something I didn't know actually for the first year or so of smoking cigars. I actually looked on Habanos website before I knew anything about cigars, and I was like, why can't I buy cigars here? But they actually have distributors that own the exclusive rights for areas. So here in Sweden, for example, Habanos Nordic distributes all Cuban cigars in the entirety of the Nordics. And it's Hunters and Frankow in the UK, and so on and so forth. So Habanos can't actually sell you cigars themselves. They sell to their distributors, and then our local shops here have to buy from those distributors and sell to you. So they have a pretty different sort of outlook on how it works. Obviously, it's a very different company. It's owned by, in majority, the Cuban state, which is a communist state. So, it's definitely not what you're used to in the rest of the cigar industry. And number 10, I don't know how much at liberty people are discussing this, but you can buy Cuban cigars worldwide. Yes, Americans, wink wink, you can buy cigars. At least you can order them, and then whether or not they get through customs, it's very, very good odds in your favor, but it is a slight gamble whether or not they get through. There are tons and tons and tons of Cuban cigar retailers, very, very legitimate websites that sell cigars even to Americans. You can place an order, they'll ship to you, and in my experience, what I know from people in the US ordering cigars from Cuba, they always get through. They pretty much always get through. So if you want to try Cuban cigars, you can search for websites that will ship to you, and it's not illegal in the sense that you'll get in trouble. I know the worst case scenario is that they'll seize the package, but then most of those sites have guaranteed shipping anyway, so they'll just ship you a new package free of charge. So that's, don't be too held back or afraid. And I'm just speaking as a cigar lover here. I want everyone to try as many cigars as possible. Alright guys, so I hope that was very interesting. At the end of the day, Cuban cigars are just a distinct flavor profile, like I said. I tend to lean towards it. It is some of the best tobacco in the world. I genuinely love Cuban cigars. I hope you liked this video, and we will see you guys in the next one.